Across the Timeways is finally here, which means we can finally play with some brand new cards. Let's see how wacky and interesting we can come up with for the day one meta. It is worth mentioning in this video, we will have 20 decks of a wide variety of different playstyles, so you should be able to find something no matter what type of player you are. We're going to start off with Leech DK with a brand new twist to it using the new legendary Krona DH. This will double the battle cry, death rattle, hero power, and end of turn effects, which means Hideous Husk will not only steal 2 life per Leech on board, it will now steal up 4, almost back to its original strength. It is also worth mentioning this deck is running the probably coolest card in the set, Husk Internal Reaper, as a way to stall out the game so you can get your combo online. We are also using Husk as a way to instantly trigger the quest, though that is just going to be an alternate win condition in some games. Now for the second DK list, which is going to be Bwonsamdi DK. The idea behind this is we are going to be using the Fabled Legendary of Talandri to give us access to Bwonsamdi, who will be buffed up through either Talandri or through What Befell Zandalar. This will allow us to get a pretty wide board whenever Bwonsamdi is destroyed, and we're going to be focusing on trying to resurrect him as much as humanly possible, thanks to Memoriam and the High Cultist package that is seen in Stegodon. Now let's get on to the next class, which is going to be Demon Hunter. I actually have 3 lists for this, starting off with one of the more wacky hear me out lists. This idea is going to be using Timeway Warden to lock out our opponent from minions for the rest of the game. Essentially, the game plan is we're going to be using a combination of Zai and Youthful Brewmaster in order to keep bouncing these wardens back to our hand, while also getting additional copies, thus essentially locking out our opponent after a long period of time. We're going to be able to survive into this late game thanks to the Starship package, which serves as a very good survivability tool for a deck like this. But if you're looking for a more competitive Demon Hunter list, the next one will have you set. No Minion Demon Hunter is the next list that we're going to be talking about, using both the Fable card of Broxigar, which will disappear from your deck so he doesn't negate your no minion cards, such as Eternal Hold, which will allow you to get a random demon that costs 5 or more, and it'll cost 0 if you have no minions, while also using a bunch of the other 0 minion package in order to overwhelm your opponent with a bunch of tokens, even using some of the long forgotten crewmate cards as a way to fill your hand with minions that can be discounted thanks to Solidarity. Broxigar OTK Demon Hunter. The idea behind this is we're going to be trying to get as many copies of Broxigar out on the board as possible in a single turn, thanks to Youthful Brewmaster. This will allow us to bounce back Broxigar, essentially allowing us to have 36 points of damage thanks to him, and we can even slam down a Cane as a way to prevent our opponent from having any big taunts that might prevent us from hitting our opponent's face with a 2-mana 12/12 charged minion. We also do have Ysera to make this combo even easier to pull off. Druid is the next class that we'll be tackling with a bit of a bottom-heavy deck. This deck uses the new support that reduces the cards at the bottom of our deck down to 1 mana. This should allow us to cheat out things like low, making it very possible to repeat what Druid was doing at the start of Ungoro, thus just spamming out a bunch of really high cost minions for essentially free, and not a lot of opponents will be able to keep up with this. We're going to be using a lot of the consistency draw power that was added within this set thanks to the bottom package, along with the pre-existing draw power cards, just as a way to fulfill this, and a little bit of a ramp. Now, for the next list, Location Druid. This is a deck that I've been trying to make work ever since Cruise Captain Allura came out. However, because this set has a huge amount of very powerful locations, this card actually is a lot better than it previously was. Thus, we can use this to maybe hopefully get some of the more powerful locations randomly summoned that we can then double using Scrapbooking Student, or just be able to double things like Well of Eternity or Zin Ajari as a way to overwhelm our opponent in that way. Overall, I hope this deck is a lot of fun, and it does allow us to showcase a style of list that really hasn't existed in Hearthstone until very recently. Now for the next class, starting off with Quest Hunter. This deck actually got a few new support cards in it, such as San Ma and Devious Coyote. These cards both act as a 7 attack and a 5 attack minion that you can easily slam down earlier than previously, thus making it where you can complete the quest quite quickly. We also are going to be hopefully kind of relying on Varissa to turn our 3 attack minions in our deck into 5 attack if we really need to, into the late game if we don't complete the quest there. People have been asking me for months for a low Walker show deck, and I present to you Lore Walker Maluk Hunter. The idea behind this deck is we are going to use Maluk as a way to discard our hand, but then it replaces our hand with an infinite banana. So if you slam down a Lore Walker show, before you discard your entire hand, you will allow yourself to be able to fill your opponent's hand with a bunch of bananas that they won't be able to do anything with. And hopefully it makes it where you'll just make them burn a bunch of cards or just have a very limited hand pool to actually do anything against you. This deck is probably the biggest meme out of all the decks that I prepared today, but honestly, I can't wait to try this one out. Now let's go on to Priests, starting with Archaios Priest. This is a deck I actually recently covered on the channel. The idea behind it previously was just slam down Archaios as soon as you humanly could, but now we have things like Power Word Barrier to buff him up while in your hand, or even turn his 1 attack into a bajillion attack as long as you have buffed up his HP. This will allow you to actually overwhelm your opponent by not only having really large health minions, but really large attack minions pretty easily. If you've been a fan of this style of deck previously, I think this one will be quite strong. For the next priest list, we're going to be covering Murozond Zarimi Priest. This one's quite simple. Murozond is a brand new legendary that has the battle cry at the start of your next turn. Set this minion's attack to infinity. Well, this normally looks really bad. However, Zarimi allows us to skip our opponent's turn, and since we can easily put them both down on the same turn, an infinite attack minion should be able to overwhelm almost any opponent as long as it can actually hit base. Let's get a bit draconic with this mage list, where we're going to be using the new Fable Legendary of Sindragosa, that if you control another dragon, your arcane spells cost 2 less. This can easily be comboed out with buy one, get one freeze, thus making it where any 4 or lower arcane spell costs 0. And because of this, we can also get additional copies of things like Instructor to give our arcane spells a bit of additional damage, or even Malagos to make them cast twice, thus reviving all of these dragons off of a Azure Stone, and hopefully overwhelming our opponent with a current projection orb that will be doubled thanks to Malagos, a deck that we've actually kind of already covered on the channel, which is Aura Paladin, except now we can actually use all the aura support that is existing in Standard Hearthstone, such as Trinket Artist or Cardboard Golem, thus extending the auras that will be dragging out of our deck thanks to the new legendary Giblin of Tomorrow, which Battlecry, put one of each aura from your deck into the battlefield. And if we get even more lucky, we can use Krona Druid as a way to duplicate all the auras that have end of turn effects, thus overwhelming our opponent that way, or even just using a Ursal aura thanks to Renewing Flame that will also be doubled up, thus doing 20 damage instead of 10. And it's time to go beyond with Quest Paladin. I know this one's not too interesting, but the Fins Beyond Time introduces a new way to refill your hand within Quest Paladin that perfectly fits in the already existing Murloc idea, which is why we're going to be including it here in this list. Now let's start off with the rogue list. The first one is going to be Incindius Rogue. The idea behind this deck is, thanks to Krona DH, we can actually easily get double battle cries off of Sandbox Scoundrel, thus discounting our Insidious down to 1 mana. This will then allow us to get additional copies thanks to Sonya, and we could even bounce back some of the cards so we can get even more copies, doing a ton of damage in a single turn. We also are using the Fabled card of Krona as just a way to do 15 damage to our opponent's face, hopefully if they have a King Lane in their hand. However, The other reason why we're using this package is just so we can draw into our very key legendary cards that we will be wanting for our combo. The other rogue list that we got here is a Dark Gift combo rogue. The idea behind this deck is we're going to be using a bunch of the Dark Gift cards and the combo cards to overwhelm our opponent with a bunch of huge minions early on and hopefully just out aggro our opponent's face. For Shaman, we got Weapon Shaman, which uses the fabled legendary of Muradin to give us the High King Hammer, which is a 1 fairy weapon with the death rattle that shuffles this card back into the deck with +2 attack permanently. In theory, we can use things like Sand Art Elemental or Skittering Death in order to buff up our hero's attack to even higher heights, thus making it where we can easily OTK our opponent thanks to the 1 fairy on this weapon, something that this deck has been historically missing this entire year. For Warrior, we got Murozond Quest Warrior. The idea behind this is Murozond is pretty good when you can skip your opponent's turn, and since Quest Warrior can easily skip your opponent's turn by generating a time warp, this will allow you to have an infinite attack minion whenever you do skip that turn. It's also worth mentioning that this deck hopes to use the Dragon package as a way to have very consistent AoE tools to overwhelm your opponent so they can't establish any type of board, while also using things like Tortola as a way to just stall out until you can get this combo online. Now for Warlock, we have Rafaam Warlock, because you knew I couldn't resist this. Time Thief Rafaam, if you played the rest of the Rafaams that were added thanks to this card, destroy the enemy hero. This means if you play Rafaams 1 through 9 before you play this card down, you instantly win the game, similar to Will of Death that already existed in Warlock, though this does take a little bit more setup. It is also worth mentioning that most of the Rafaams are actually pretty good control tools, thus allowing you to easily survive into the late game if you even just play Curve Stone where you're slamming down one Rafaam after another. And because you get a Rafaam that is 1 through 10, you can easily slam in Elise in this list to get that advantage there too, if you want to do that. And now for the final deck of the video, Agamaggan Warlock. Now, you might be wondering, why are we trying to make this deck work after it got nerfed? Well, Divergence is a pretty neat card, since this allows you to split a random minion in your hand into 2 parts. Hopefully this will hit things like Puppet Master Dorian or a Agamaggan, which should allow you to overwhelm your opponent by summoning down a bunch of really high cost cards and doing a bunch of damage to your opponent's face that way, or just establishing a wide board of huge minions. All right, so those were all the decks that I prepared for day 1 of Across the Timeways. Let me know what deck you're most looking forward to using down below. And if there's any other style of lists that I might have missed that weren't included in here that you might be wanting to try out instead. But before we end the video, if you want to, you can always join the channel memberships as a way to give a little bit of additional support so I can keep up on making this type of content. But if you can't afford it, then no worries, just please leave a like, comment, or subscribe if you already haven't. And special thanks to our current channel member of Daniel Nascimento. And like always, until next time, bye-bye.